Doctors Without Borders say its medical team has treated thousands of patients since the war broke out in Sudan. Most of the patients have been unable to get medical treatment as a result of a broken health system. The war was triggered by a move to integrate the army and paramilitary forces after the ousting of Omar or al-Bashir in 2019. Joining us is Tom Casey, who is the emergency communications advisor at Doctors Without Borders. A very good afternoon to you, Tom. Thanks very much for your time. The inability to deliver the health services, but also medicines to people who are affected by this war. Is it deliberate, or is it just a natural consequences of things that have gone wrong or that are abnormal?
Thank you, and good afternoon to your listeners. I think that's an excellent question, and sadly what we've seen as Médecins Sans Frontières since the beginning of the war last April is consistent blocking of the work of humanitarian and medical organizations such as MSF from getting supplies, essential staff to the places that need them in Sudan. I think a recent UN estimate found that more than 70% of the country's hospitals were no longer functional, and those that did remain, minimally so. And sadly, with the objective of defeating their enemy, what we see is each warring side fight in a manner which does not protect civilians, and this extends to the blocking of essential supplies getting to areas controlled by the other warring party. For example, in South Khartoum, we have consistently been refused necessary permits to bring supplies and staff to teams performing medical activities there.
And there is not the intervention you sometimes see in other war zones where they are, you would find, negotiations where parties or governments or try to negotiate a safe passage of food stuffs, but also emergency medicines for emergency. There isn't such a thing at all in Sudan right now as we speak.
So I wouldn't say this doesn't exist at all. I mean, some supplies do get through, and we're relieved they do. However, what is clear and what we're arguing for consistently as MSF is that the needs in Sudan are staggering. This is one of, if not the most significant humanitarian crisis we are facing with, and we work all over the world. But the response of the humanitarian sector, the availability of healthcare is nowhere near sufficient, nowhere near at all. And even if some supplies are able to get through, organizations are able to function in some minimal way, this is frankly insufficient. And that's why MSF has consistently called on the UN, other international organizations to scale up their activities to some way that is just slightly commensurate with the needs. But at the same time, we recognize this is an extremely difficult place to operate. And we call on both warring parties, the Rapid Support Forces, the Sudanese Armed Forces, to facilitate this scale up. Because frankly, Voyu, the people of Sudan urgently need this. They've needed this for a long time.
A difficult place to operate in, you say, but what exists elsewhere or in other war zones that is probably, or that is absent, or that is making it more difficult to operate here?
Well, I suppose it's always slightly difficult to compare different crises, right? They have their innate attributes which make them unique. But I'd say what characterizes this one is consistent obstruction, as I've detailed, from the warring parties and the work of humanitarian organizations. Frankly, what appears to be an insufficient will from international organizations to provide activities commensurate with the needs. People are trying, but challenges can be solved, if you know what I mean. And frankly, the people of Sudan need that. At the same time, the level of insecurity and violence is quite shocking. MSF ourselves we've MSF staff, properties, and facilities have faced 60 attacks or instances of looting since the war started, and that is only us. So the kind of general level of insecurity, lack of respect for medical and humanitarian organizations, all of this contributes to a very dire situation, and it's the civilians, the people in Sudan, who are the victims of that.
And of course, I mean, almost always in situations like these, the levels of sexual and gender violence are usually quite staggering.
Yes, indeed. I mean, we recently released a report kind of focusing on violence, the violence that we've seen ourselves, the violence we've been told about by our patients. And indeed, we received harrowing reports of sexual violence. What's important to remember is, due to stigma and lack of available services, let's be frank, the numbers of people coming forward are small, and the numbers of people receiving appropriate care are even smaller. But as MSF, we do run services for survivors of sexual violence. For example, in Miala, we've been running services there. And again, it's just one among many features of this war where the population are suffering due to savage violence, frankly.
And again, in these situations, it's difficult to even know the extent of the deaths and the everything that goes with these situations. Any word on the ground as to whether there are any attempts to resume mediation efforts?
I mean, since the war started, talks have been ongoing throughout. And, MSF, we're a medical organization, humanitarian organization. Our focus is very much the population. I suppose it's not for us as a medical organization to say what the solution that would end the fighting would be, but what we do say loudly, clearly, and categorically is that civilians must be protected. Civilians have lost their protection in this war through bombings, shellings, airstrikes, stabbings, and that is, for us, unacceptable.
Tom Casey from Doctors Without Borders, of course, the organization really appealing to everyone who can think about the people who have been caught in this war, and there seems to be no end in sight, but scores of people continue to suffer, and with no solution or end to this conflict in sight, more and more people are bound to suffer.